Hello, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be redesigning the 8 main characters from the Pixie Hollow series I remember as a kid, specifically the characters from the book series. Just figured I'd give a little background in case you're unfamiliar with it, because I feel like, even though this is a Disney property, I feel like it's a bit more niche and less the target for what my channel usually is, which is usually doll-based videos. But I really loved this series as a kid, and the art by David Christiana in the novel series was really influential to my style. So in honor of Faebruary and in honor of the art that inspired me the most as a kid, I decided to go ahead and do my own spins on these 8 characters. I also want to clarify something that's true for every video, is that these redesigns are never meant to be taken as a defense to the original artist. It's more just me having fun with character design because I love to do it. So let's get into it. I chose a color for each of the 8 characters, so we're just going to go in rainbow order. And starting off with red for this color, I chose Fira. So my redesign board here is mostly a lot of solar punk, because I felt like that was very fitting for a light talent fairy. But at the same time, that's a set that's very ill-defined in terms of what it looks like so far. So I used a lot of garments that had these really bold patterns and harsh lines. So starting off with this first redesign here, also of note is that I'm only going to spend 5 minutes each section because there's 8 redesigns in this video, or otherwise it'd be forever. So the first one, I did a lot of celestial theming, big medallion in the center, and some very flared disco-like pants. For the next one, I did a high bun with this sort of overdress underneath a pleated skirt. I felt it was a little too maternal. The third one, I did this sort of halo with all the planets on it and some very spiky shoulders. And on this fourth design here, I wanted to have her have really big fluffy hair like she does in the original, with this very long trailing dress, as well as with a wire corset. And here now I'm just picking my favorite parts from each of the designs like usual, and then I'm going to combine them all and do what I want to do for my design, my little thumbnail here. So I wanted to have her have that big swoop of bangs, but then have her have a really long braid in the back, similar to her original design, because I felt it was just really iconic. Then I'm going to have this very stiff wire corset that resembles sort of the rays of the sun, and I wanted to incorporate a lot of metallic golds and silvers into her palette as well. And another thing that was really fun and for this series was designing shoes that didn't need to be walked on because they fly. So for hers, it's a little crescent moon as the bottom, which would be impossible to walk on, but it doesn't matter if you don't walk. So here I'm just thumbnailing out my colors. I originally played around with having some purple in this palette, but I ultimately ended up toning that far down to have it be more red and gold. So starting with her makeup and just doing all the flats here. Her skin color is a very orange and red, more so than is realistic, because I felt like since they were fairies, I didn't really have to have them 100% resemble human skin tones. So that was definitely fun to play around, where a lot of the characters have skin colors that are sort of adjacent to natural skin tones, but are a little bit more saturated than they would be in real life. I also wanted to give all the pixies claws, because I feel like that's very much a default whenever I'm designing any sort of creatures, and I love to draw long nails and claws. I also wanted to give them each different shaped ears and different shaped wings that correspond to their personality or talent or something about them. So for Fira here, she's got big moth wings because people call her Moth because she likes light so much. So finishing up the flats here, using different colored pinks for the peplums, because I wanted her to have a fat body type, but I also wanted to create, I feel like it's very common in plus-sized garments, we try to create the illusion that that person doesn't have as big of a waistline as they do. So I wanted to sort of mimic that here. So I have the wire corset with these big rays that are pointing towards the shoulders and towards the hips, and as well as with peplum to sort of exaggerate those parts of the body without having her have an hourglass figure per se. So the overskirt of her design is this big galaxy fabric that has a metal edged train with a crescent, or just circular moon shape really, designed at the front to represent a full moon with the different phases of the moon on each side. Then I also have her wearing these gloves that have a little bit of a gradient to them, and some stars at the edge that have a chain around the wrists that have gold to really enhance the metallicness of it, with some star and moon symbols within it. She's also got the same clips in her hair to match. On her head, she's got this really big crown to match the metal rays that are on her shoulders and hips, with this big halo that's very celestial. Underneath, she's wearing a red pleated dress, because I felt like I wanted her design to be very much sort of regal and formal, since she's the leader of her talents, and also sort of reflect how, at the same time, she's sort of shy and anxious. So a lot of sharp angles and lines. She's also got a metal necklace and some metal jewelry all throughout her design. And for the background, I used a picture of some blurry Christmas tree lights. This overall took me 2 hours and 35 minutes, which is a lot quicker than I feel my usual times are, because I was definitely racing to get all of these out on time. So overall, I'm definitely really happy with how she turned out. Moving on to Tink, who I assigned the orange color, although I didn't want to be too monochromatic with her design because, one, she's very much associated with the green dress, and that's obviously very iconic, and two, in my original color thumbnails of these, I felt it was looking a little too Rainbow Magic rather than Pixie Hollow, so I definitely felt bringing in some greens and some bronze was the correct choice here. So for her design, I definitely wanted to go very steampunk as a Pots and Pans or Tinker Fairy. I definitely really think it's just fitting for her design. I think it's cute and rustic and fairy-like. There's also an idea that was tossed around in some lost concept art you can see in the corner there. So for the first one, I went very baggy with a big apron and a big dress. Then the next one I did very tight, very skin tight. The third one I wanted to, and the fourth one too, I wanted to find sort of a happy medium between items of loose clothing and items of tight clothing, something that would be practical to wear when you're blacksmithing, but at the same time, you know, it's close to your body, so you don't have to worry about it catching on anything, but it's also free to move around in. So I'm starting out with drawing her apron here. I decided to have a bent fork, the tines of a fork, as a sort of corset belt for her to hang her tools off of. Then a long leather apron with sort of carved out designs. Then I wanted her undershirt to have these baggy cut open sleeves, so that way it's able to move around and it's breathable, because I imagine it gets quite hot in the workshop. I also wanted her to have some big goggles and a little bustle of a skirt underneath, as well as some big work boots. So here I'm thumbnailing out my colors. I wanted her to have more of a tan complexion than as a pale one, but I still wanted her to have good contrast between what she was wearing and also the iconic blonde hair. For her wings, I have them as a hammer shape on top and pan shape on the bottom. Although when I did ask someone, because I was wondering if these really read, I got the answer that they thought they were scissors, which works either way. So good enough. So I'm just thumbnailing out the colors here. Definitely wanted to do a lot more sort of browns. I feel like orange is also just a color palette that I don't work with a lot. I tend to push things either towards red or towards yellow than staying in orange. So this color palette was a little bit tricky, and I feel like it's probably why I chose this one as the one to diversify my palette away from being so monochromatic. I also have some little bells in a leather loop wrapped around one of her boots here, because obviously she's Tinker Bell, she needs some bells. And it's really fun designing all these different hanging objects for her tool belt. There's her iconic hammer, which I had the loop, decorative loop, on resemble the sort of iron shapes that were found in the bedroom of her in one of the coffee books they made for this series. There's also a dagger, which canonically she has, and a wrench, because obviously. Speaking of her metal objects, I also wanted to incorporate a spoon as a necklace for her, and have her glasses be made out of sea glass so they match the sort of green. Her apron is a mixture of leaf and leather, and so are her gloves. They're mismatched. One of them is grass, and the other one is leather with buckles. On the top, I decided to make that open shirt yellow, as well as with the pom-poms on her shoes and the socks under her big boots. I also wanted to add a metal brace to one of the boots just to incorporate more metal throughout her outfit, and add some gears on the bottom that stick into where the sole would be, because again, you don't really need to walk in these shoes because you wouldn't be able to because it sticks through to the bottom of it. But it is a bit more practical than Fira's per se, because I feel like as a Tinker Fairy she's probably working a lot more and moving around a lot more. So I felt like her outfit needed to be very practical and very sort of cluttered to sort of sell that almost like engineer type vibe that she's got going on. Speaking of, I definitely wanted to include a lot of different like bits and baubles throughout her design so that she's very visually engaging and so that she's also like has the look of a character who goes out and finds things and mixes them into different objects. So, just finishing up adjusting my level layers here, the background is a piece of steel from the Mothman Museum that I went to in 2016, and here is the final result. Her design took me 2 hours and 45 minutes overall. I'm really happy with how she came out especially. I felt like this design was definitely the most challenging because she's like the most iconic character, but at the same time I really had a lot of fun because I don't draw a lot of steampunk characters, so it was fun to explore that new little niche there. So next up is Lily. For her, I wanted to do a more natural, very floral cottagecore type of aesthetic. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is that since it is canonical that the book series takes place later than the canon of the movie series, I wanted it to sort of be post-Industrial Revolution, so a lot of their clothes are more knit fabrics and weaves and prints and things like that. But with Lily, I definitely wanted her outfit to be almost exclusively made of natural materials and like visibly natural materials. So that was a fun thing that I kept in mind while designing her. For the first look, I did these big baggy bell-bottom pants with this peasant top. For the second one, I tried this sort of more almost Victorian, very long, flowing, but corseted dress. And for the fourth look, I wanted to focus in on overalls, big belt buckle, very practical garden-based outfit. And for the last look here, wanted to have it be sort of a tighter top with big sleeves with tight pants and sort of a loose over jacket. And then I'm just combining all my favorite parts of these. I also wanted to base her wings off of oak leaves because those are some of my favorites and she's one of my favorites as well. I also assigned her the very bright color of yellow because I feel like Beck was always rooted in more green tones in my mind than Lily was, and I feel like yellow is a bit more floral, so that's the color I went with. So I'm going with a pretty simple piece of this flower petal top with a big rose on the shoulder for decoration, and these birch bark pants, while keeping some of the more practical aspects like gardening gloves and a tool belt. I also wanted for her shoes to be sort of barefoot sandals with a little bit of leaf at the bottom to act as the sole, in case she does do some walking around. Which I imagine she might, being that she is, similar to Tink, a bit more practical in her aesthetics and her job. So, just blocking out what I want to do with the colors here. Wanted it to be mostly yellow with some hints of off-white and green throughout. Another thing, for her hair, I wanted it to be these sort of almost bug-like little buns at the top to be reminiscent of antenna, and have sort of short, choppy bangs, and then these long tendrils at the front, because that is something that is a recurring theme through a lot of these designs, are sort of two longer pieces of hair at the sides, because I imagine that being sort of like a trend among the culture in the time period. So I thought that was a fun little thing to sort of work throughout a bunch of their different designs. So I'm just now coloring in the birch bark texture on her pants. I really like the incorporation of the peels and how her top is made out of, you know, visual flower petals with some little petal details and a very tiny little snail shell as the necklace, the twine and the leaf of her shoes being very obviously natural, and just sort of figuring out ways to incorporate that while still having it be like, you know, this is this object, but it's clearly made out of this thing. It was something very fun to keep in mind, and I almost want to do a redesigned set of the movie Fairies and have them all have this very like natural aesthetic, because I thought it was very fun and a bit challenging to sort of design that way. So maybe next Faebruary, we'll see. So just finishing up the colors here, I ended up working a little bit of red into her wings and into the shading of the yellows throughout to add some more depth to her colors. I had some trouble with getting the pants to look okay because I felt like they were just a lot brighter of a color than all the other stuff in her outfit. I also wanted to give her these little sort of floral makeup accents. And another thing that was fun was incorporating some yellow highlights because I didn't want to limit myself in the fact of like making their skin color look entirely natural. I want it to be a little bit unnatural to, really push the fact that they are fae and not humans. Overall, her redesign took 2 hours and 26 minutes. So for the background here, I used this picture I took out of a botanical garden of some yellow flowers with a bumblebee. Then I'm just, of course, adding the little bit of outline here, a little bit of pixie dust to the background. And now, here's the reveal. I'm really happy with how she came out. She's one of my favorites, and even though her outfit has less pieces, I feel like it's very strong in the fact that it is fairly simple, and I feel like that fits her aesthetic of she's not going to take a lot of time to get dressed and put on a million different pieces every day. She's a garden talent. She's in the garden, she's working, so I want it to be a bit more practical while still being very feminine and light and cottagecore. So I'm really happy with how she turned out because she's always been one of my favorites. Next up is Beck, who, similar to Lily, has also always been one of my faves. So, like I already mentioned, for her I wanted to do a green color, and her aesthetic I wanted to base in more sort of grunge, and I discovered this subset of grunge while doing some research on the aesthetics for the mood board here called Fairy Grunge, and I was like, wow, this is perfect. And it definitely influenced my design a lot more than I think the other ones going into it, because I had in my mind general ideas of what I wanted to do for most of the rest of the characters, but with Beck, I really liked her original design, so I wasn't sure what I was going to do, so I was really inspired by this mood board that I put together. So for the first outfit, I'm playing around with some fishnets, a big hoodie, but overall I feel like it's pretty similar to her original look. The second one I definitely got more experimental with it, and this sort of was like a turning point in my brain of like, I can do anything I want here. So for this third look, I'm bringing in that little leaf skirt that she has in the original, but adding a bunch of different hairstyles and like fishnets and boots and all sorts of like torn up clothes to really play around and sort of subvert it. And then for the fourth look, I want to do this really ragged hoodie, because I imagined her clothes would be pretty beat up, since she was always more sort of like a tomboy and worked with animals and in the woods. I always imagined her sort of being like kind of weird in her mannerism to other fairies and being very rough and tumble, not afraid to get dirty. So I definitely wanted her clothing to be a bit more beat up, but at the same time be a bit more modern and more obviously have like knits and fishnets and things like that, since as an animal fairy, even though she is more connected to nature, I sort of wanted to do the inverse of what I did with Lily and have it be like she goes through clothes pretty quickly because she is so rough and tumble. So for her hair, I have 3 different hairstyles going on. I have that same little bun situation going on that I had with Lily with the long tendrils, but instead of being loose natural tendrils, I wanted to have them in big braids, and then at the back have natural textured hair with little bits of like beads and egg beads throughout. And for her look, I definitely wanted to incorporate that knit ragged hoodie, and for her wings, I wanted to do a bird wing and a bat wing on the bottom to again sort of emphasize her connection to animals. For the top, I did this sort of like bra top with a fishnet undershirt and some little jean shorts that have some fur to line the edges of them. Also kept that sort of like leaf skirt as homage to the original, because I felt like this design was pretty far from the original Beck design, so I wanted to include a element to sort of root it back in that original design. I also added a little loop at the top of her hair that has a little gemstone hanging from it, because I wanted to definitely incorporate green everywhere throughout, and just I feel like gemstones and fur and having gold elements, those all really tie back to like having a really earthy, foresty look in my mind, to offset like the things like the fishnets and the big platform boots that are a bit more natural. I also wanted her to have a beanie, because again, I wanted to really have her have a lot more modern textures and materials going on than a lot of the other fairies. So just doing the flats here, you'll notice with the undershirt, we want it to be sort of more distressed spandex fabric than fishnets like the leggings, because I wanted it to be another different texture and have a bit more sort of coverage than a fishnet would. For the shading, I wanted to make it look like the bird wings had not real feathers, but I imagine their fae wings to be sort of flat, but with the designs sort of drawn on like they were in the original. So I'm adding a little bit of detail to it, but not so much that it looks three-dimensional. For the gold, I definitely wanted it to be really shiny because I felt like the metallic, again, helps call back to Earth. I was really happy with how the shading on the leaf skirt turned out. I think it looked really good. Something that I forgot to mention with her hair is that I wanted the buns to sort of resemble animal ears instead of so much bug insect antennae as I did with Lily, so they were a little bit rounder and squatter. And I also wanted to give her big mammalian ears, since I wanted to do ear variation between all of the different fairies here. So, for this picture, I'm just using a picture I took of a squirrel in a tree because it felt very fitting. Finishing up the last little bits here. Pulling in a bit more red in the shading to contrast all the green in the design. And here's the final redesign. I'm very happy with how she turned out. Overall, her redesign took 1 hour and 57 minutes, which is the quickest redesign time of any of the characters in this lineup. So I am happy with how it turned out overall. I feel like it's very different than the original design, so I'm definitely glad that I didn't, hold myself back being beholden to what the original design looks like. So, and up next is Rani, who is my absolute favorite, but I feel like she was everyone's favorite looking back on it. I feel like they definitely pushed her really hard because they might have felt like a fairy who was disabled or didn't have wings wasn't as marketable, but instead they just ended up making her the best character. So for her mood board, I wanted to do a lot of Art Nouveau because I was very present in all of the art for this series, but I definitely felt like Rani is the character where it makes the most sense, so I definitely wanted to still push that with my redesign. So a lot of flowing dresses, a lot of flowing headbands with jewels and gems and pearls, a lot of just making things as swoopy as possible. So first redesign is a more sort of standard dress. Second one has a bit sort of more flapper style with some short hair. The third one has pearls wrapped around everywhere. And the fourth one has these sort of water lily shoots at the bottom because I wanted her to have a bit more natural textures too. But I felt like overall the flower shoots at the bottom was a little bit too sharp, but I did end up incorporating that into the design by instead using woven strands of grass and pine needles throughout. To create those natural elements in her final redesign, I added some pine needles and flowers at the neckline, a big seaweed belt, a headdress with some water lilies at the side with strands of pearls and pine needles throughout, a bunch of shells and sea glass all throughout her design, and definitely wanted to go with a sort of more softer color palette, which is something I really struggled with because that it's far out of my range. I'd much prefer working with neons and bright colors. So this color thumbnail here changes a lot overall from what the final design actually is, and you can see me playing with it quite a bit here. So I also wanted to do these big poofy bell sleeves with loose buttons, loose seashell buttons, might I add. And I also wanted to add, since she's a water fairy, little bits of details that are fully water-based, like a bubble necklace and some water shoes, because Rani is someone that has to walk around since she doesn't have wings, so I wanted her shoes to be still impractical and still whimsical, but still fully cover her feet and give her protection from the ground. So with this little overdress here, I have it in a sort of asymmetrical cut with another skirt underneath it that has big pearls sewn on it, although they would be small pearls, they're just fairy sized. And then another skirt under that is the grass weaving. And of course I had to include her little leaf pockets on her dress because that was always my favorite part of her design. So on the bottom of the grass, instead of having it be sort of a raw edge, I wanted to add some muckwort to the bottom to really make her design look more watery and natural, along with the pearl chains and gemstones here and there, but mostly sea glass throughout her design and pearls. I also wanted to add a bit of spiderweb embroidery to the center part of her dress. I feel like the spiderweb doesn't really add anything, it doesn't say anything to her design, but I felt like it was a good, relatively simple but detailed enough area to fill out that space, because I wanted her design to be very much detailed, because being that canonically she sort of saved everyone and sacrificed herself, I imagine she would attain a very high status and sort of thanks for that. So I wanted her dress to reflect someone who was sort of not royalty but near to it as a result of her hero status. Her hair I wanted to be extremely long, as it was in the original, but it's also very common in Art Nouveau designs to have this big, like, swirly, flowing hair, and hair is my favorite thing to shade, so I wasn't gonna pass up an excuse to draw a lot of it. Her redesign time was 2 hours and 59 minutes, which was the longest time of any in this lineup. Just finishing up these highlights here, I wanted to add little bits of pink here and there throughout her design to, again, really have it feel very soft and feminine, like that Art Nouveau aesthetic often feels. For the background here, I used a picture of a creek that I took. I zoomed it way up so she looks small proportionately, of course. And we're coming up on the final redesign here. I'm again adjusting the colors and adding highlights because I was really struggling with this color palette. But here's the final redesign. I'm very happy with how she turned out. I feel like it's similar to the original, but when you look back, it's very complicated. I feel like this is more just how I always imagined her looking. So it was fun being able to draw one of my childhood favorite characters again. I'm really happy with a lot of the little details that I managed to put in there, like the head crown, which isn't something I've drawn before, I don't think, so I'm proud of that. So next up is Bess, who I feel like I'm saying this every other one, but was another one of my favorite characters. I always liked her since I was also someone who was always artsy as a kid. So for her mood board, I wanted to have it be rooted in Morikai, because I feel like that's, in my mind, like very similar aesthetic-wise to what I imagine like a good art teacher to dress like. Lots of flowing garments, lots of lace details, lots of layers, very cozy. So for this first look, I have a sort of asymmetrical top and bottom, both matching. For this next look, I wanted to do a bit more like sort of fairy elements, so I have her hair up in a bun with little hair sticks, hairpins, with this long knit sweater on this very ruffled skirt. For this next one, I wanted to lean into more artsy, so I have this big sort of asymmetrical, very pointed cloak with a little artist beret, of course. And for this next one, I wanted to try a bit more of a blend, so I also did the beret and the asymmetrical cloak, but with a more sort of flat apron covering it instead. So just going through and combining all of my favorite ideas now. I have her carrying a little thing of paintbrushes. I also wanted to bring back that sort of dual long strand at the front hairstyle that I imagine is trendy at the time, since being someone who's very artsy, she'd probably be a bit of a trendsetter herself. So I have these two hairpins with her hair up in a bun in the back, a low bun that's very messy, and I wanted to keep her acorn hat because I always really liked that detail, but I wanted to have it shaped like a beret instead because I thought that was just cute. So I wanted to keep that asymmetrical cloak and bring in the lace details and have a little dragonfly pin, because I feel like pins are very art teacher. But I also wanted to have this sort of petal-shaped dress that has pockets in it that I imagine is sort of like an over-smock over the rest of her dress. I also have a scarf tied around her waist and a layered skirt that you can see poking out from underneath that also has a turtleneck. At the shoulders, I wanted her to have some epaulets of big pieces of yarn, well, normal-sized pieces of yarn, really, because I felt like that sort of fraying aesthetic was very art teacher, and I wanted to keep the detail of her being covered in paint. So obviously that'll occur when we get to the coloring, which we're getting to now here. So I wanted to assign her the color of indigo because I felt like that was pretty much the original color she was assigned, and to complement it I wanted to use this warm reddish brown throughout and a bit of reddish purple throughout too. So first thing I started doing was the acorn hat, because I was not sure how I was going to be able to color it at first, but I figured it out. I'm really happy with how the texture turned out too. Also, I wanted to incorporate a lot of texture throughout her design in terms of like different patterns, so I have a lot of lace throughout, obviously, but I also wanted to have the ochre smock be this sort of plaid texture, or pattern really. So I'm also having the cloak be knit, and I had this idea to give her vitiligo because I felt like it'd just be a fun little detail and add to the very like soft rounded shapes I wanted to have in her design, offset by the one very sharp cloak that I felt was very like artsy. So just figuring out where I want all the paint blotches to be now. I also wanted her wings to resemble sort of paint blotch shapes, so they're very sort of loose and spotty rather than being as defined as I've had some of the other fairies' wings be. just playing around with how I want them to overlay, because these two wings that are tucked down to the bottom are overlapping each other, so I wanted to have them be sort of a little bit transparent looking. I went a bit back and forth on having her design be based in Morikai, since it is supposed to be very woodsy, almost sort of cottagecore adjacent, and have the look of someone who's very in nature. And that's not really Bess's personality, but I felt like just aesthetically the look really fit how I imagined her in my head. So I ultimately went with going with it. And I like how it looks. I feel like it's very fairy, you know. I'm also really happy with how the plaid design overall turned out. I'm just finishing up the last little bits here of adjusting everything, and for the background I used a picture I took of one of my old art classes where we had to do a still life of some jars and some cones, obviously, so I imagine this is somewhere in her studio. So moving on, here is the final redesign. Overall, it took about 2 hours and 39 minutes, which is about average here. I do really like how this design came out. I really enjoy all the paint splatter details and all the texture on her acorn beret and the inclusion of vitiligo, which was a last minute idea, but I really like how it turned out. Up next is Vidia, who, again, one of my favorites. I've always really loved villain characters. I, unfortunately, though, did lose the speed paint file of this, so instead I'm going to be talking over the PNG, which luckily I still have. So for my mood board, I wanted to go very hard in on, like, spiderweb goth was sort of like what I thought of in my mind of it as. So a lot of lace, a lot of chains, very tight-knit clothing, because as a fast-flying fairy, and is present in her original design as well, is the need for very tight-fitting clothes that won't get snagged anywhere. So for this first redesign, I wanted to do very skin tight and keeping that long hair that she originally had, but for the second one I got to play around with a little bit more, a bit more comfortable when redesigning her. So I had this thistle cloaklet and gave her short spiky hair and a dagger along her thigh. For this next look, I wanted to include a big hat because I felt that was very goth, along with some big goth sleeves and little skirt, but I felt like overall that was a bit too flowy for her. And for the fourth design, I wanted to incorporate this idea of sort of like athleticism, so I have this very like sport jockey V on her sweater and some tight pants and some feathers on her shoes to represent, you know, her fast flying talent. So my overall redesign here incorporated various elements of these. I wanted to have that long bang and those two tendrils of hair at the front, but I wanted to keep the back very short, like spiky. Also wanted her to have dragonfly wings, since they are known for flying very fast. I also have that V shirt that she has have these long hole-filled tendrils, because I imagine as someone who has been exiled, she has to live out in the woods, and so I imagine her looking very scrappy because of that. So, blocking out my color scheme, I assigned her purple, the same as the original. I also wanted to give her this big scar across her face to, again, make her look like she's someone who's been living on the outskirts of society after being, you know, punished for stealing from Mother Dove for pixie dust. So I wanted to give her very intense dark makeup, because I felt like that's an essential for any goth look, and I love drawing it. Also wanted to give her a knee pad and a scraped knee on the other side, have her look like her outfit is a bit sort of like, not necessarily hodgepodge, but like it's missing pieces from wear. The wings were very fun to draw, which I don't have footage of because I draw traditionally instead of digitally, and then I just scan in my line work, which I do in ink. For the heels, I wanted to again do a very impractical shoe, so I have pine needle heels and a bit of barbed wire around her ankle there, just to make her look a bit scarier, I guess. I also wanted to have a lot of stitch work throughout her holes that I imagine she does herself, and I'm having it in this like lilac color right now, but I do like shade it and all, so I wanted to try to make it look like spiderweb silk. I also have some feathers poking out at the cuffs of her shirt to again tie together the whole flying aspect, and I really loved the idea of a thistle cloaklet because it's purple and it's spiky, so I felt like it was perfect for her. So almost done with the flats here, and now it's time to go on to shading. I felt like her wings probably have a bit more dimension than some of the other fairies, so I definitely wanted to give them a lot more detail than any of the other fairies got, because it's her whole thing. I also wanted her ears to have this very spiky sort of look to differentiate them from the rest. On top of the shirt, she also has another little sort of shoulder pad and a leather piece of like lace up on her arm there to help give her some protection out of the wilderness. Dark purple shading on her to, increase that color scheme and the non-human skin tone, and I like how it looks like she's almost bruised all over, which I feel like is makes sense for her. I imagine she is someone of the personality where she gets herself into a lot of trouble very easily. I also wanted her to have these very high knee-length boots because it's very goth classic, but I wanted them to be very lightweight and not weigh her down when she's flying very fast, we'll say. The only part of her design that is very flowy is the bang on her hair and the two tendrils of her shirt, and the tendrils on her shirt are very beat up because I imagine they get caught on things pretty frequently. For the background, I just used a picture of a sky that I took and changed the colors around to be purple, and here's the final redesign. This is almost maybe my favorite in the series. I really like all the detail in her wings and how all the colors turned out. Overall, this redesign took 2 hours and 10 minutes, although I am missing a big chunk of footage, so I don't have the exact time that it took. I am really happy with how this design turned out. Obviously, the aesthetics of goth and all very in my comfort zone, so I had fun. Up next is Prilla, who was never one of my favorites, actually. I said something different at the very end, but I wanted to give her very short design, have her be very short and squat and rounded, which is, canonical because she is the most childlike of the fairies. So for aesthetic, I wanted it to be very sort of like pastel kidcore, very fairy-like pixie core, if that's a thing. So the first design I felt like is very similar to original design. Second design, played around with a bit more. I have this pixie cut because I thought that would just be very cute on her with this big sheer over top. For this next one, I have bows in her hair and the leaf little overalls with a fun little sweater, striped leggings, and for the fourth design, I wanted to play around with her having the ribbons in her hair be very long and flowing, and have this big sort of natural cut leaf like cloak. So for my final design here, I am once again, as always, putting together my favorite bits of each, and I really liked the idea that I had of ribbons that were like flowing everywhere, because I feel like ribbons in the hair are very that automatically roots a design and looking sort of childlike, but I wanted to sort of change it around so it looks a bit more ethereal. So on top of the pixie cut and ribbons in the hair, I also wanted to add some ribbons on the end of her skirt and as sort of like garters around her elbows. So I have a leaf dress as a callback to her original, but with a sheer and lace over top, and these very fuzzy socks, so they felt like those would just be cute. And I wanted her shoes to be a cork block with a cat's eye marble, because marbles are, again, very childhood-like, and I wanted the marble to stick out further than the flats of the shoes. That way it would not be possible to walk on in real life, and sort of call back to, how they fly around for most of the time. For her wings, I wanted to do a lot of swirls, not any real sort of detail, just like how a kid would draw a fairy. And I also wanted her ears to be the most human-like out of everyone else. They're just a little tiny bit pointed, but mostly human-shaped. So, just going in with my flats now, I wanted her color scheme to be mostly pink, because that was her original color scheme. It also has associations with childhood, and I wanted to add in bits of green to keep it from being too monochromatic again. And I felt like green was sort of an anchoring color. I feel like all of the redesigns have a little bit of green somewhere, almost all of them. For her shoes, I wanted to use big clovers and clover stems as the straps, because I felt like, again, making clover chains is another thing very rooted in childhood. For the different hair clips and little embroidered details on her sheer shirt, I did stars, flowers, and hearts, because, again, very childlike, very whimsical. So I also added in bits of yellow everywhere because I didn't want the green to look too heavy or too blue and bring the pink more into purple. So I wanted it to be rooted in warmer colors. So I'm just now going through and coloring in all of the lace everywhere. I have it set to this dark blue right now just so I can see it better, and then I change it to a pink. Then I'm going in and coloring her wings and adding some shading. I did use blue here because it ended up contrasting the colors the best here, but I did go in and highlight with the yellow to keep it a warmer sort of color in the palette. I also wanted her to have a little scraped knee detail, just sort of add something to her skin. I also have her with little like dots all over her face, drawn on, a little bit of pink eyeshadow, just to really keep her looking very like whimsical and like pixie-like. I also have for her earrings little individual wish puff strands, because I just wanted to include as many little cute details as I could, as always. I'm really happy with how the ribbons and all the swirls throughout her design turned out, because I feel like it is right down the middle of looking childlike while still looking ethereal and fairy-like. So I was really happy how it turned out. For the background, I just used a picture of a little kid-sized playhouse that I took. And the final redesign time for character in this group was 2 hours and 50 minutes. And here is the final redesign of her. I do really like how she came out, which I am proud of, because she wasn't a character that I liked very much as a kid, so I'm glad that I was able to sort of change up her look. I felt like not liking her that much as a kid definitely feel like it gave me a lot more liberty to do what I wanted and play around with her design. And I love all the cute little details that I was able to jam into her design, and hopefully she reads as cutesy and kidcore. So here is the final image of all of them together. I really like how they all came out. I love how they have their own very distinct aesthetics and styles and color palettes, but at the same time I feel like they look really cohesive as a group. So I'm definitely really happy with how this project came out, and I hope you enjoyed the video. Remember to subscribe for more like this, and you can follow me on my art Twitter or my art Instagram for more posts like these, where I post at least 4 times a month, and I will see you in the next one. Bye!